Imagine this. One day, you wake up ready to take your prized vintage car for a spin, only to discover that it's now illegal to drive on public roads. Unthinkable, right? But this is the reality. The US government has just proposed a shocking plan to ban all vintage cars by 2025, citing environmental concerns. But is this really about saving the planet, or is there a bigger agenda at play? What will happen to car culture, personal freedoms, and the legacy of these iconic vehicles? Let's dive in. What's happening? The US government has proposed a ban that would prohibit vintage cars from public roads by the year 2025. Classics like the 1965 Mustang or the iconic 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air could be relegated to museums and private collections. This proposal has sent shockwaves through the classic car community, sparking outrage and disbelief. What's the reasoning behind this audacious move? According to the policymakers spearheading the proposal, it's all about addressing environmental concerns. The argument is that vintage cars, with their outdated technology, contribute disproportionately to pollution compared to modern vehicles. But is this really about the environment, or is there something more at play? The implications of this ban go far beyond emissions, raising fundamental questions about freedom, history, and culture. This isn't just a debate about cars, it's a battle over identity, history, and the very fabric of American culture. But to understand why this proposal has ignited such a firestorm, we need to dive into the specific targets of the ban and why vintage cars are being singled out. Why vintage cars are being targeted? Why is the government zeroing in on vintage cars when they represent such a tiny fraction of vehicles on the road? It doesn't add up, does it? The proposal argues that vintage cars are disproportionately harmful to the environment. Built long before the implementation of modern emission standards, these vehicles lack the catalytic converters and fuel-efficient technologies found in today's cars. Proponents claim that removing these gas-guzzling relics from the roads is a necessary step to meet aggressive climate goals. But here's the catch. Vintage cars make up less than 1% of all vehicles on American roads. They're rarely driven, typically reserved for weekends, special events, and leisurely cruises. Their environmental impact pales in comparison to the daily emissions produced by millions of modern cars, trucks, and SUVs. Critics argue that targeting vintage cars is an easy way for policymakers to appear environmentally proactive without tackling larger polluters. After all, industrial operations, private jets, and cargo ships contribute far more to greenhouse gas emissions. So why pick on vintage car enthusiasts? The focus on vintage cars feels less like an environmental necessity and more like a symbolic gesture, a move that targets a small, passionate community while ignoring far greater sources of pollution. As the controversy unfolds, it's clear that this proposal isn't just about the environment. The backlash reveals deeper concerns about the loss of cultural and personal freedoms. The outrage. What happens when the government threatens a beloved tradition? You get a full-blown rebellion. The proposal to ban vintage cars has ignited fierce backlash from enthusiasts, collectors, and everyday car lovers. For many, these vehicles are more than just machines. They're rolling pieces of history, embodying the innovation, artistry, and spirit of the eras in which they were built. Consider this, the 1960s muscle cars with their roaring V8 engines symbolized post-war prosperity and American dominance in the global auto industry. The 1950s cruisers, adorned with chrome and tail fins, reflected the optimism of the baby boom generation. Banning these cars feels like erasing chapters of history, silencing the stories they tell. Beyond history, this proposal strikes at the heart of personal freedom. Owning and driving a classic car is, for many, an expression of individuality and passion. It's a hands-on connection to the past, a way of preserving craftsmanship and engineering that defined earlier generations. Car clubs, where enthusiasts gather to share stories, restore vehicles, and celebrate their passion, are also under threat. These clubs aren't just about cars, they're about community. They bring people together across age groups and backgrounds, united by a shared love for these iconic vehicles. If vintage cars are banned, what happens to these communities? This isn't just about losing access to cars, it's about losing a piece of ourselves, our history, and the connections that bring us together. But as the debate rages, the question remains, is this proposal really about emissions, or is there something more driving this radical push? The deeper implications. Could this be about more than just the environment? When you peel back the layers, a complex web of motivation starts to emerge. On the surface, the proposal claims to address climate change by reducing emissions, but skeptics argue there's more to the story. Some believe this is about control rather than conservation, a way to limit personal freedoms under the guise of environmental responsibility. For policymakers, targeting vintage cars is low-hanging fruit. Classic car enthusiasts lack the political clout of billion-dollar industries like aviation or tech, making them an easy target. While industrial operations and luxury yachts escape scrutiny, it's the car collectors who are being vilified. And there's also a financial angle. Modern car manufacturers stand to benefit from policies that push older vehicles off the roads. With vintage cars sidelined, consumers may feel compelled to invest in newer, more expensive models, boosting sales for the automotive industry. Could this be a calculated move to drive profits rather than save the planet? Critics also point to the double standards of policymakers who champion environmental regulations while indulging in carbon-intensive lifestyles. Private jets, luxury cars, and sprawling estates leave far larger footprints than a 1970 Dodge Charger that's driven a few times a year. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just about emissions, it's a collision of politics, economics, and cultural values that raises fundamental questions about priorities and fairness. With the stakes this high, the fight is just beginning. In the next part, we'll explore the environmental and economic consequences of this proposal and why the numbers don't add up. The environmental justifications. Are vintage cars really the environmental villains they're made out to be? Or is this just a convenient scapegoat? The truth might surprise you. Proponents of the vintage car ban argue that these classic vehicles, built long before emission standards were introduced, contribute disproportionately to pollution. They point to their lack of catalytic converters, fuel efficiency, and modern exhaust systems as evidence of their environmental harm. The argument is that removing these relics from the roads is a necessary step toward achieving aggressive climate goals. California, often at the forefront of environmental legislation, has been a driving force behind this movement. The California Air Resources Board has championed policies like zero-emission zones and stricter regulations for older vehicles. With these rules already gaining traction in states like New York and Massachusetts, the federal government appears to be following suit. But here's where things get murky. While classic cars do emit more pollutants per mile than modern vehicles, they represent less than 1% of all vehicles on the road and are typically driven sparingly. These aren't daily commuters, they're Sunday drivers, parade participants, and showpieces. Their overall environmental impact is negligible compared to industries like aviation, maritime shipping, and manufacturing. The numbers don't lie. Vintage cars may emit more per mile, but their limited use makes their total environmental footprint a drop in the ocean. So why are they being targeted? If vintage cars aren't the real problem, what about the economic impact of banning them? Let's shift gears and explore the financial ramifications. The economic ripples. What happens when a multi-billion-dollar industry suddenly gets the brakes slammed on it? The fallout could be devastating. The classic car market is a massive economic engine in the United States, generating billions of dollars annually. In 2020 alone, the collector car industry was estimated to have brought in over $15 billion in revenue. This ecosystem includes mechanics, restorers, event organizers, auction houses, and countless small businesses. A ban on vintage cars threatens to derail this intricate network. Consider car shows and auctions, cornerstones of the vintage car community. Events like Monterey Car Week in California or the Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale bring in millions of dollars for local economies. Hotels, restaurants, and small businesses thrive on the influx of visitors during these events. If vintage cars are banned from public roads, these gatherings could vanish, taking their economic benefits with them. Then there's the issue of taxes. Classic cars contribute significantly to state and local revenue through sales taxes, registration fees, and luxury taxes on high-value models. Without these contributions, governments could face budget shortfalls, particularly in states where the automotive sector plays a vital role. For individual collectors, the stakes are personal. Many enthusiasts have poured their life savings into restoring and maintaining their vintage vehicles. For some, these cars are investments worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. A sudden ban could render these investments worthless, creating a ripple effect of financial losses. The economic cost of this proposal is far greater than most realize. It's not just about the loss of jobs or revenue. It's about the livelihoods of thousands of Americans who depend on this industry. But beyond the dollars and cents, there's another cost to consider, one that touches the heart of what makes America, well, America. Cultural significance at risk. What's a nation without its history? When you ban vintage cars, you're not just erasing metal and chrome, you're erasing stories. Classic cars are more than machines. They're symbols of innovation, artistry, and freedom. From the sleek roadsters of the 1950s to the raw power of the muscle cars of the 1960s, these vehicles tell the story of America's industrial rise and its cultural evolution. A ban on vintage cars feels like an attack on this history, a move that prioritizes progress over preservation. Take, for instance, the iconic 1969 Dodge Charger, immortalized in movies and TV shows, or the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, a car that became synonymous with post-war optimism. These vehicles aren't just cars, they're cultural icons tied to specific moments in history. Banning them would be like tearing pages out of a history book. Beyond history, classic cars play a vital role in community life. They're centerpieces of parades, educational tools for at-risk youth, and the pride of car clubs across the country. These clubs bring together people of all ages and backgrounds, fostering a sense of community and connection. A ban on vintage cars would rob these groups of their purpose, dismantling networks that have taken decades to build. This isn't just a policy, it's a cultural crossroads. The choice to ban vintage cars is a choice to abandon a cherished tradition that has defined generations. But here's the real question. Is this really about emissions, or is there something else driving this proposal? Let's peel back the layers and uncover the motivations behind the ban. Unmasking the motivations. Could this ban be about something more than climate change? When you dig deeper, the picture gets murkier. On the surface, the proposal to ban vintage cars is framed as a necessary step to combat climate change, but critics argue that this is more about control than conservation. Targeting classic car enthusiasts, many of whom lack the political clout of larger industries, feels like a calculated move. Think about it. Industrial operations, private jets, and cruise ships contribute far more to global emissions than a 1968 Ford Mustang driven on weekends. Yet these larger polluters remain untouched. Why? Because they're backed by powerful industries with deep pockets and strong lobbying efforts. Vintage car owners, by contrast, are easy targets, small in number, and lacking the resources to fight back effectively. There's also a financial angle to consider. With older cars off the roads, consumers may be pushed toward buying newer, more expensive models, benefiting automakers. Electric vehicle manufacturers, in particular, stand to gain as the push for zero-emission vehicles intensifies. Could this proposal be less about the planet and more about profit? Then there's the question of personal freedoms. For many, owning a classic car is an expression of individuality and passion. Losing the right to drive these vehicles feels like a loss of autonomy, a move that prioritizes regulations over personal choice. The deeper you dig, the more questions arise. Is this really about emissions, or is it about politics, profits, and power? As we move forward, the battle lines are being drawn. Enthusiasts, businesses, and lawmakers are rallying to fight back. But will their efforts be enough? The enthusiasts strike back. When you threaten a community's passion, you spark a movement. And this movement, it's revving up like a V8 engine on race day. Classic car enthusiasts are not taking this proposal lying down. Across the United States, collectors, restorers, and car clubs are mobilizing to defend their cherished vehicles. What began as whispers of frustration has now become a roar of resistance as grassroots efforts gather speed and determination. Events are taking on new meaning. Car shows and rallies, once celebratory gatherings, are now doubling as protests. These events highlight the cultural and economic value of vintage cars, presenting a united front to policymakers. A parade of classic Mustangs or a convoy of 1950s Chevys is more than a visual feast. It's a powerful statement. Organizations like SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Market Association, are stepping in to lead the charge. With deep ties to the automotive community, SEMA has been a vocal advocate for enthusiasts' rights. They've launched awareness campaigns, organized lobbying efforts, and brought attention to the economic and cultural significance of the classic car market. The fight is gaining momentum. What started as a niche interest is quickly transforming into a nationwide movement, one that's too loud to ignore. But it's not just enthusiasts making noise. Lawmakers are stepping into the fray, and the debate is reaching a boiling point. The political pushback. When classic cars became a political battleground, the stakes skyrocketed, and so did the controversy. The proposal to ban vintage cars has ignited fiery debates across political lines. In states like California, where the automotive industry is deeply ingrained in the culture, the backlash has been particularly intense. Lawmakers are finding themselves caught between environmental goals and the cultural and economic importance of classic cars. Republican leaders have framed the ban as an attack on personal freedoms and private property rights. rights. Representative Doug LaMalfa of California has called the proposal a radical overreach, emphasizing the financial and cultural harm it could cause. He's joined by a growing chorus of voices demanding a more balanced approach to environmental regulation, and surprisingly, resistance isn't confined to one side of the aisle. Progressive lawmakers, often champions of green policies, have expressed concerns about the practicality of the ban. Their arguments targeting vintage cars, which are rarely driven and represent a tiny fraction of emissions, is an ineffective strategy. Instead, they propose incentivizing sustainable practices, like promoting electric vehicle conversions for classic cars. Public opinion is shaping the debate as well. Polls conducted in automotive hubs like Michigan and Texas show widespread opposition to the ban. The message from voters is clear. They value their classic cars and they expect their representatives to do the same. The political fight is heating up, and it's clear that this is more than just a policy proposal. It's a flashpoint in the larger battle over freedom, culture, and environmental progress. As lawmakers wrangle over the future of vintage cars, the media and public discourse are adding fuel to the fire. But what role will manufacturers and businesses play in this unfolding drama? The automotive industry's response. What happens when an industry worth billions feels its foundations begin to shake? The automotive world is bracing for impact. The proposed ban has sent shockwaves through the automotive industry. Manufacturers, aftermarket parts suppliers, and restoration shops are all grappling with the potential fallout. This isn't just about enthusiasts, it's about the economic backbone of an entire sector. Classic car restoration shops, often small, family-owned businesses, are particularly vulnerable. Many rely on a steady stream of customers who cherish their vintage vehicles. If these cars are banned from public roads, demand for restoration services could plummet, forcing many shops to close their doors. Aftermarket parts manufacturers face a similar challenge. Companies that produce components for classic cars, everything from carburetors to upholstery, could see their customer base evaporate. For an industry that thrives on passion and nostalgia, the loss of vintage vehicles would be a devastating blow. Even automakers like Ford and General Motors are paying attention. While they focus primarily on producing new vehicles, their legacies are tied to their classic models. A collector cherishing a 1965 Mustang is more likely to buy a modern Ford vehicle. Losing this cultural connection could erode brand loyalty, creating long-term challenges. The industry isn't taking this sitting down. Advocacy groups are working to protect their interests, emphasizing the economic contributions of the classic car market. Manufacturers are exploring innovative solutions, like supporting electric conversions and synthetic fuels to keep vintage cars on the road in a more sustainable way. The automotive industry is rallying behind its heritage, proving that classic cars are more than just relics. They're a vital part of its identity. With enthusiasts, lawmakers, and businesses joining forces, the battle over vintage cars is entering its most critical phase. But what does this fight mean for the future of car culture and the environment? A cultural heritage at risk. What happens when a piece of history is erased? For classic car enthusiasts, the answer is nothing short of heartbreaking. Classic cars are more than just vehicles. They are rolling time capsules, embodying the spirit of innovation and the open road freedom that once defined America. From post-war cruisers to the adrenaline-fueled muscle cars of the 1960s, these machines tell stories of industrial prowess, cultural shifts, and the boundless ambition of their creators. Losing them would mean losing a tangible connection to the past. Car clubs, events, and parades featuring classic cars do more than entertain. They bring communities together, foster education, and instill pride in craftsmanship. For younger generations, these cars offer lessons in engineering and design that modern vehicles with their pre-assembled components often lack. Imagine small-town parades without vintage Chevys or muscle-bound Mustangs. Imagine a future where children no longer dream of owning the cars their grandparents once cherished. This is the cultural void the proposed ban threatens to create. For many, this fight isn't just about keeping cars on the road, it's about preserving an irreplaceable piece of who we are. While the cultural stakes are monumental, could innovation offer a lifeline to save these icons of history? Innovating to keep classics alive. Can the tools of the future save the treasures of the past? As the debate rages on, some see a middle ground, one where innovation breathes new life into classic cars while addressing environmental concerns. Electric vehicle conversions for vintage cars are leading the charge, turning relics of the past into sustainable wonders. Companies like Zelectric and EV West are retrofitting classic cars with electric powertrains, allowing them to run cleaner and quieter while maintaining their iconic designs. While the cost of conversion, often tens of thousands of dollars, remains a barrier, advancements in technology could lower prices and make this a viable option for more enthusiasts. For those unwilling to part with their internal combustion engines, synthetic fuels offer hope. Companies like Porsche are developing carbon-neutral fuels that could allow vintage cars to run without contributing to climate change. These solutions not only keep classics on the road, but also ensure their legacy evolves alongside modern environmental goals. The future of classic cars may look different, but it doesn't have to mean their extinction. Innovation is proving that we don't have to choose between history and progress. By embracing new technologies, the classic car community can preserve its passion for generations to come. But even as these solutions emerge, the fight to save vintage cars is heating up in the political arena, with battles that could reshape the future of car culture. The political battle. When a nation's history becomes a political pawn, who really wins? The proposal to ban vintage cars has become a lightning rod for political controversy. In California, where progressive policies often lead the nation, lawmakers and advocacy groups are clashing over the potential consequences. But the debate is no longer confined to the Golden State. States like Texas and Michigan, with deep ties to automotive heritage, are rallying to protect their car culture. Republican leaders have criticized the ban as an overreach, framing it as an attack on personal freedoms. Meanwhile, even some Democrats are questioning its practicality, arguing that vintage cars contribute minimally to emissions. The issue has transcended party lines, becoming a broader conversation about how America balances progress with preservation. Grassroots efforts are amplifying the resistance. Advocacy groups like SEMA are lobbying lawmakers, organizing protests, and spreading awareness about the economic and cultural stakes of this proposal. Their campaigns emphasize that banning classic cars isn't just about environmental concerns. It's about an identity that resonates with millions of Americans. The political battle over classic cars is uniting people across ideological divides, proving that this issue is about more than just vehicles. It's about what kind of future we want to build. As the political and cultural debates rage on, one question remains: can sustainability and car culture coexist? A sustainable future for classics. Is there a way to save the planet without sacrificing the past? The automotive industry is at a crossroads. As electric vehicles and stricter emission standards dominate the future, the challenge is finding a path forward that includes classic cars. Fortunately, there's hope. Electric conversions, synthetic fuels, and even hybrid retrofits are gaining traction as solutions that allow enthusiasts to enjoy their vintage vehicles without harming the environment. And the industry is beginning to adapt. Some manufacturers are embracing the shift, offering resources to support conversions or promoting carbon-neutral fuels. Car clubs and advocacy groups are also playing a role, educating members about sustainable practices and pushing for government incentives to make these solutions more accessible. But this isn't just about technology, it's about mindset. Enthusiasts are realizing that embracing sustainability doesn't mean abandoning tradition. Instead, it's an opportunity to evolve car culture, ensuring it remains relevant and resilient in the face of change. The road ahead may be challenging, but it's clear that the classic car community is ready to innovate, adapt, and thrive in a world that demands both preservation and progress. As we close this chapter, the future of classic cars remains uncertain, but the passion of their defenders is undeniable. Classic cars are more than machines. They are pieces of history, culture, and identity. As we face a future filled with challenges, the fight to save these vehicles isn't just about preserving the past. It's about ensuring that the spirit of innovation, freedom, and individuality they represent continues to inspire generations. What are your thoughts on this issue? Do you believe the government's proposal is a step too far, or do you see it as part of a necessary environmental shift? Let us know in the comments below. Share your stories, your memories, and your passion for classic cars. And if you want to stay informed about this ongoing battle, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Together we can protect the legacy of classic cars and ensure their place on the roads and in our hearts for years to come.